Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the July 2022 edition of the St. Louis Java Users Group. For those who don't know, the St. Louis Java Users Group is an informal group. Attendance is free. There's no formal membership list. Normally, we meet on the second Thursday of every month except December when there is no meeting. There's just too many things going on over the holidays for us to organize a meeting in December. When we meet in person, you can join us for food and social at 6 p.m. and the meeting starts at 6:30. And when we meet in person, our location is in the Object Computing Incorporated training room, and that's at 12,140 Woodcrest Executive Drive, Suite 310 in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd like to thank the other members of the St. Louis Java Users Group Steering Committee. So from left to right, we have Ted Doyle, Todd Zimmerman, Bruce Allspaw, that's me in the middle, Wei Chi Gao, and Kathy Zwang. You can reach all of us at the St. Louis Java Users Group Steering Committee if you send an email to that address that's at the bottom of your screen. That's javasigsc@ociweb.com. The St. Louis Java Users Group would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. So I've got their logos up here. We have Object Computing Incorporated, and they are our original sponsor going back to 1997. They've been with us all this time, filling in, supplying things like the room and filling in for all kinds of things to make this meetup group possible. JFrog is another fine sponsor. They cover the subscription fees for the Zoom account, as well as the subscription fees for Meetup. Now, it's free for you to use the Meetup site to RSVP for meetings, but it does cost the group some money to be able to have a website on the meetup.com website, and they cover that cost as well as the Zoom subscription, so you can all join and make this meeting possible. Signature Consultants and Adaptive Solutions Group are both headhunters. So if you're looking for a Java position, or if you have a Java position that you would like to fill, just do a quick Google search and contact them. Let them know that you found out about them through the St. Louis Java Users Group. And when we meet in person, they will often sponsor the pizza, but we haven't figured out how to send a pizza through the internet yet. And but if anybody can figure that out, please let me know. At the end of the meeting, we will have a raffle, and we will be raffling 2 JetBrains licenses. Now, if you're watching the recording, I'm sorry, you're too late. You do have to be present to win any of the door prizes at the end of the meeting. But we'll be raffling 2 JetBrains licenses for any product of your choice. Elastic is the company behind Elasticsearch. They're well known. They have some gift cards that we're holding on to. So as soon as we're back to meeting in person, we'll raffle those. Intertech is a training company. So if you're looking to brush up on your software skills, go to intertech.com, and they have lots of training videos and other resources there. They sponsor the famous Screaming Flying Monkeys. What are those? They're little dolls where if you throw them up against the wall, they scream, and they're a whole bunch of fun, as well as coffee cups and mouse pads and things like that. And we'll get back to raffling those once we're back in person. Manning will be raffling off 2 Manning ebooks of your choice at the end of the meeting. So again, you have to be present at the end of the meeting to enter the raffle for that. Pearson also sponsors physical computer books as well. So thank you to all of our sponsors. We really appreciate your support. As far as announcements go, the Kansas City Developer Conference, KCDC, is now open. I'm not sure if it's still early bird, but it's running, I believe, August 10th in Kansas City. And you can go to that website, kcdc.info, for details. And yes, you saw it. After a long hiatus, Java 1 is back. That will be October 17th through the 20th in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's the big one. And you can get the details there at oracle.com/cloudworld/Java1. But those aren't the only conferences happening. Strange Loop will be September 22nd through the 24th at Union Station. And that will be an in-person event. And for details on that, you can go to thestrangeloop.com. And I just found out here a day or two ago that the JConf 2022 conference is now September 26th through the 28th. The early bird registration is open. And that's on, you can go to that website, 2022.jconf.dev for details. And the organizers of that conference have sent a JUG discount code. So there it is at the bottom of your screen. That's JUG dash, and then a whole bunch of letters and numbers there. So if you want to get that JUG discount code, you can save 20%. It may even be on top of your early bird registration. I don't know. But they just made that one available and they asked me to announce it. So there it is. And you'll be able to see that again if you watch the recording of this video after the meetup is over. As soon as I can get the recording posted on YouTube, I will post a link on the meetup site. And so you'll be able to watch the video. And you can do that on all of our meetups by watching the videos. We've been recording them all along so that you can watch those meetups again just by going to my YouTube channel. Yeah, I've got all, I don't know, whatever it is, 32 subscribers or whatever. Like I'm really going to monetize that one, right? Anyway, as far as upcoming presentations go, on August 11th, we have Juke. That's Database Abstractions Without Distractions by Jason Lee of Red Hat. And he is one of the organizers of the Oklahoma City Java's users group. I'm not sure exactly how active it is. I happened to see his presentation when I was in DevNexus in Atlanta, and it was a pretty good presentation. It's an alternative to using ORM mappers like Hibernate. Juke is kind of a domain-specific language. You still write Java, but you do it in Java to write SQL and access your database that way. It's a different strategy for getting into your database. So as far as presentations go, you can always watch meetup.com/gatewayjug for updates to the presentation schedule and location. Because as soon as we have a meeting scheduled, we just post it there on the website, and you can RSVP as soon as it's posted to get a reminder. Now, if you're interested in giving a presentation or would like to sponsor the JUG, we're always looking for presentations and sponsors, and the best way to do that is to email the steering committee at that email there, javasigsc@ociweb.com. So those are my announcements. Tonight's presentation is Thriving in the Cloud, Venturing Beyond the 12 Factors with Rich Haggerty, Catherine Kodama, I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right, and Harry Hoots. They're all from IBM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and that will allow Rich to be able to share his screen. And looks like you're unmuted. Why don't you take it away here, Rich?
Okay, let me make sure that my screen is that, can you see that?
Yes, I can see your whole desktop there.
Okay.
And there's the slide.
Okay. And you forgot to mention, Bruce, that we would like to offer some raffle prize. Surprise.
Well, you just go right ahead, and maybe we can even add IBM as an official sponsor.
Yes.
You can work that out. Yes, we're always interested in more sponsorship opportunities. So yeah, tell us about what you'd like to do.
Well, let's see. Let me get my pointer ready. So today's first of all, welcome. Thank you for attending. So today's topic is thriving in the cloud, venturing beyond the 12 factors. I guess a good subtitle would be Intro to Creating and Building Cloud Applications. That's what this is all about. We're going to start with a background on the 12 factors application methodology, which are basically just a set of guidelines or best practices for building cloud-based applications. We're going to talk about some extensions to that methodology. We'll introduce some other cloud native technologies that can make it easier to implement those factors. And then finally, at the end, that should take about 25 minutes. At the end of that, we're going to get to some fun stuff. All of you will get a chance to take a look at some sample code and run it using our Open Liberty Skills Network Lab environment, which just requires a browser. You don't have to download anything locally. So it's always a good thing to run through. You learn a lot by going through those. To start, let's do some presentations. As Bruce said, we're all from IBM. I'll start. I'm Rich Haggerty. I'm based out of Austin, Texas. I'm a longtime software developer and currently a developer advocate focused on Java technologies and runtimes. Catherine?
Hi, everyone. My name's Catherine. I'm on the Liberty Developer Experience team at IBM, and I'm based out of Toronto in Canada. And I focus on developer tools and how can we make the lives of developers more productive as they use the open source tools for the cloud native Java community.
And my name's Harry Hoots. I work on the Open Liberty kernel team out of RTP, North Carolina. Basically just fixing defects, adding new features to our kernel for Open Liberty. So back to you, Rich.
So as you can tell, we're represented from all across the United States. We have you guys surrounded in St. Louis. So let's get started. So basically, what are cloud native applications and why are they so different? First off, if you're new to developing applications for the cloud, it can be a little daunting, but hopefully tonight we're going to give you some good information to start you with a good foundation. So here's a nice word cloud that represents all the best characteristics or attributes of a cloud application. So we'll pick out some of the big ones there, the big words. It should be scalable. So that means your application or service needs to be able to rapidly scale up and down based on system load and demand. Your microservices should be loosely coupled so that it can be easily stopped and started independent of other services. It should be observable. That means your application or microservice should constantly be logging so that it can be monitored to determine current health. And a lot of these attributes are going to get automatically by being on a cloud native infrastructure. That is, if you design and build your app so that it takes advantage. So how do we do that? And that leads us to the 12-factor app methodology. So this was developed by Heroku for running on their platform around 10 years ago. And since that time, it's been widely accepted by the development community. It's basically, like I mentioned before, basically a set of guidelines or best practices that you should follow when designing and building your application for the cloud. So it's not specific to any programming language or set of tools or frameworks. In fact, it was written before, Docker and Kubernetes and all these other cool tools that are out there. So it's very generic in that sense. So here are the original 12 factors. I'm not going to go through all of them. We have a link at the bottom, 12factor.net website, which will give you all the details, but let's hit some of the highlights. One, your code base should be tracked in version control, and there should be one code base per application per microservice. You can have many deployments from that code base, such as staging, production, development, but you have one code base. Two, dependencies should be explicitly declared and isolated. That means you specify versions of libraries so that you can repeatedly build the same bits. Three, configuration. We should all know this. Everything should be stored in an environment, nothing in your code, nothing hard coded. A good test for this would be, can you take your source and move it to open source? You probably couldn't if you have any admin passwords hard-coded or API keys in there. So 5, build, release, run. These all should be defined stages that can be run separately. Let's jump down to disposability. This is all about fast startup and graceful shutdown. This is especially important for microservices for scaling and updating for different versions, things like that. And logging, 11, is very important. It's important that all of your services and applications log in event streams. That's the key point. Don't log to log files. And let's see. And again, if you want more details on all this, that is a good website, 12factor.net. And as with all methodologies, technologies, they evolve. So this is, and it's also true for the 12 factors. So now it's 15 factors. So the new version obviously added 3 more, but it also expanded and clarified some of the existing original ones. The new ones are like API first, which means define your APIs up front, set up contracts so that the calls can be verified to avoid any kind of breaking changes. This is really important if you have application sharing services. Telemetry is very similar to logging, but adds additional monitoring like health status and performance metrics. Authentication and authorization is all around security, which is really important in cloud environments, especially when dealing with containers. Again, there's a link at the bottom. So O'Reilly has a book on this very subject called Beyond the 12 Factor, which would have a lot more detail. So let's try to look at this graphically. So here is a end-to-end process for building and deploying your application. So in the box on the right, we have a cloud environment where we have some cloud-based applications using some services. And on the left, we have arrows showing a build and deployment pipeline. And we got a couple of repos there where we might be addressing some accessing some Docker images and maybe some Maven artifacts. Now let's superimpose the actual 15 factors on top of that and how they relate to the entire pipeline. So on the left, you can see the factors associated with building, verifying, tagging, and deployment. And on the right, you can see all the factors that come into play once the application is running in your cloud environment. And then we go back to that word cloud where we had those characteristics we're looking for, and we put those on top. And you can see rapid refers to the single code base that has design, build, release, run phases defined and deploying to a known cloud environment. Once deployed, your app can easily be scalable up or down. With logging and telemetry, you get observability. And if you follow all the other factors, you're going to get your services are loosely coupled and your application should be resilient and robust. So here are some examples of some technologies you can utilize to achieve these characteristics and attributes of your application. So one is hosting your source code in Git. I think we all know that, where you can set some triggers to go through some Tecton pipelines that invoke your JUnit or microshed testing. You could pull images from your registry in Docker Hub and your artifacts from a mirror of the Maven central repository. Then once your app is deployed to the cloud, you can be obviously running that in a Docker container managed by Kubernetes, and you can monitor it with the Kibana dashboard using Elasticsearch. So now with that background, we're going to turn to some other cloud native technologies to help build our cloud native apps or cloud-based apps. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to Harry. And I'm going to keep running the display. So just tell me when to change slides, Harry.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. So in today's fast-paced agile development world, developers choosing APIs, frameworks, and runtimes often want open source software so they can have access to the source code. So let's take a quick look at some of the open source Java technologies for writing a cloud native application. Next slide, Rich. So first is MicroProfile. MicroProfile is an Eclipse Foundation project, and it's been around for a couple of years now. It's a community-driven open collaboration project where vendors and Java users come together to define what is needed in terms of APIs to build quality microservices using the Java programming language. And as you can see from the bottom of the slide, there are many vendors who participate in this project and have implementations of MicroProfile for their Java runtime servers. The project itself really boils down to optimizing enterprise Java for microservices architecture and giving users a good set of building block APIs to easily create microservices. So next slide, we'll take a look at those APIs. So at the core of MicroProfile are the building blocks like REST, JSON-B, JSON-P, configuration, and those help you build RESTful applications that are part of the 15-factor application methodology. Your microservice will be interacting with other services, and you'll need a good set of APIs to help you integrate with those other services in a cloud native environment. So whether that is exposing APIs via OpenAPI or securing your services with JWT, those are all parts to building that 15-factor application. And lastly, but certainly not least, you need APIs to make sure your applications run well and play nicely in a cloud native infrastructure. And this is where the APIs like health check, metrics, and open tracing come in to help achieve that. MicroProfile is supported by many different frameworks and runtimes, and overall, it gives developers a lot of flexibility for cloud native microservice deployments. Next slide. Next is Jakarta EE. Jakarta EE is another collaborative effort by the Eclipse Foundation and takes its roots from Oracle's Java EE codebase. Its focus is to evolve Java in an open source manner and bring developers the best APIs they need to develop cloud native enterprise Java applications, as opposed to MicroProfile, which is more about optimized microservices. So let's take a quick look at the APIs it offers. Next slide, Rich. So you can see from this slide that Jakarta EE gives you the basic building blocks you need to build and construct a REST application. And then there's lots of other APIs to do things like connect to relational databases or handle transactions in your enterprise application. It also has other APIs to do everything from batch to messaging to servlets, just as Java EE had in the past. Next slide. So Open Liberty. So now that we have a solid set of APIs for MicroProfile and Jakarta EE, developers are able to build quality apps following the 15-factor approach, but we also need an open source Java runtime server, and that's where Open Liberty comes in. It was open sourced in 2017 and offers a great developer experience. It's very lightweight with respect to memory footprint, yet it's robust for production environments. Open Liberty supports both of the API frameworks that we just discussed, and it's a great option for running your Java applications in a container on the cloud. Next slide. A couple of the nice features that I really like about Open Liberty is the ability to only load the components or features that are needed by your application. This helps keep images small when running applications in a container on the cloud. Additionally, Open Liberty has a server package command, which allows the developer to minify a server image. This zips up an application with just the runtime and configuration that's needed for it to run. That feature is great from both a development flexibility standpoint, and it's also useful for immutable infrastructure installs where you just FTP the package server over to a host environment, unzip it, and run it. Next slide, please. So dev mode. Another helpful feature of Open Liberty is dev mode. Running the server in this development mode boosts productivity by getting immediate feedback from code changes without restarting the server. This also means that users can use whatever IDE or text editor that they would like when making source code changes. And hopefully that leaves anybody in the room that likes to use VI or Emacs with a smile on their face. It sure makes me happy to be able to use VI. We have dev mode support for both Maven and Gradle builds. And there's a link embedded at the bottom of the page that has more details on those. Next slide. All right, so we're around to a fully open Java stack. So we've talked about open source API frameworks to give us the building blocks to develop our 15-factor application. We've also talked about Open Liberty as an open source Java runtime server that's cloud ready, has a small memory footprint, and is production ready. So let's quickly discuss OpenJ9 and the IBM Cymru runtimes, because we'll also need a JVM and an SDK to complete our fully open source stack. So OpenJ9 is an open source JVM originally developed by IBM, but later moved to Eclipse Foundation in 2017. One of the best features of OpenJ9, in my opinion, is that it's optimized to run in the cloud with microservices as well as monoliths. It also has a fast startup time and uses less memory without sacrificing application responsiveness. Then IBM Cymru runtimes is IBM's open source version of the Java SDK, and it fully implements the Java SE APIs. The Cymru runtime will be the only distribution packaged with OpenJ9, and together that combination makes for a great open source option for running your applications in the cloud. So with the addition of OpenJ9 and IBM Cymru runtimes, we have all the components we need to make up a completely open source stack and create and run your 15-factor application. So now let's move on to the live coding portion of the presentation, and Catherine will show us how some of these open source components work in action. So over to you, Catherine.
Great, thanks, Harry. So I'll take over screen share now, Rich, and we can get into the hands-on portion of today's session, which is the live coding. So hopefully in today's session, the bulk of the time we can spend actually getting hands-on, and you guys can try out some of the technologies that Harry just mentioned, and then we'll try and tie them back to the 15 factors that Rich talked about at the beginning as well. So from openliberty.io, we have a series of guides that we make available that help you pick up these new technologies. So you can see there's quite a lot of guides. I think we're close to 40 guides now, all the way from getting started with your first cloud native app to trying out the different APIs from Jakarta EE and MicroProfile. And today we have 4 guides that we outlined that we think are good guides to start with. And I'm going to walk through this first one here, so don't worry too much about following along, and then we'll leave the rest of the time up to actually trying these hands-on, and we can hopefully answer any questions you might have, and we'll take us through that. And if there are any questions, feel free to write them in the chat or come off mute. Rich and Harry, if you see any questions in the chat as I'm talking, feel free to interrupt, and we can hopefully answer those as well. All right, so on openliberty.io here, we can see that we have the guides tab here at the top, and this is where we publish all of our guides. So the first one we outlined is creating a RESTful web service here. And our guides are all in a similar format where you get an overview of what you'll learn. You are walked through the different aspects of the guide, the different APIs and technologies that are being used. Usually you write some testing for the application that you develop at the very end. And then at the end of every guide, we suggest where to next. The next guide we suggest you try out. We also host all of these guides on GitHub. So if you have questions about any of them, feel free to interact directly with them on GitHub, or raise an issue if you notice any bugs. And the nice thing about these guides too, and for today's session, is that you can run them in the cloud. And this is an entirely cloud hosted environment. So you don't have to download anything on your machine. You can try it all out in browser, as Rich mentioned at the beginning, and that's what we're using today. If you do want to try it out on your machine, every prerequisite is outlined at the top. So most of the guides just need a Java SDK, GitHub, and Maven or Gradle on your machine. So it's quite easy to follow along as well. All right. So let's go to the run in cloud option here to try the first guide. And I think I already opened this, but the first time you try out this run in cloud option, it will prompt you to log in or create a username. You can log in with a GitHub account, or you can just create a new one as well. And then you select Access Cloud Hosted Guide, and that will bring you to the IBM Skills Network site here. Let's see, I think I already have this open. Okay, so this is the IBM Skills Network Lab, entirely cloud hosted, powered by the IBM Cloud here. And this is the exact same guide we just saw, but now we're in the cloud hosted environment. So on the right, you can see your IDE, your editor looks very similar to VS Code if you're familiar or use that often. And then on the left, we have our instructions for each guide. And then you can see the table of contents too about the different sections. So I'll walk through this first one and then we'll open it up to the floor so that you guys can try them out yourselves. So this first one is around creating a RESTful web service. We'll be using Jakarta RESTful Web Services or JAX-RS, JSON-B, and then of course we'll be deploying our application with Open Liberty here. So every guide starts out with a what you'll learn section just to give you an overview of what we're building. So for today, we're building a very simple application where you can access a system properties URL, and that will return the system properties of your machine. So for example, it looks something like this, maybe give you your OS name or your Java version. So since we're working in the cloud hosted environment, it'll give us the system properties of the machine that we're working on in the Skills Network Lab environment. And this is all about designing HTTP APIs. So this really ties back to, that factor number 2, API first, designing with our API in mind as we walk through creating a new application. So getting started, so the first thing we want to do is navigate to the home project directory. So to do that, you could go to terminal, new terminal, get a new terminal instance here, or you can actually just click this little button here. So there's 2 buttons. One will execute that command in a terminal instance for you, so you don't even have to type it out, or you can copy and paste it over here. And so really whatever you feel works best for you. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and clone the Git repository that has the code for this lab. So I'm just going to run those commands there, and we can see that what that did was actually populate a project. So this is the REST intro guide. And all of our guides are split up into the same format. You have a finish directory, and then you have a start directory. And the idea here is that you're going to work out of the start directory and add source code to this. And then by the end of the guide, your start directory should match your finish directory. So the nice thing about that is that when you clone a guide, you can go into the finish directory, poke around, run it, see how the final application should look. And then also if you get stuck at any point in any of the guide, so you can always reference the finish directory to compare if you think you've made a mistake. So let's actually run the application just to get a sense of what this will look like when we're done. So I changed to the finish directory here, and then I ran liberty run here. And this is actually starting up it's building the application and then deploying it to Open Liberty. And something else to call out here is that this application is using Maven. So with Maven, we have a pom.xml file that defines properties for application. We can see that we have dependencies like the Jakarta EE dependency and the MicroProfile dependency. And then it's also using the Liberty Maven plugin here. So this is the plugin that's helping us run this Liberty run goal here. And that does tie back into dependency management, factor number 3 as well, having this build file using Maven or Gradle to manage all our dependencies. And here in the terminal, I know it's very small, but we can see some messages. Let me try and make this a bit bigger. So we can see our default server is ready to run, and we can see that it started in 12.71 seconds. And now we can try to check out this service by curling this system properties URL. So I'm going to go into another terminal here and run that curl command. And here we can see the results of that command. We've got all of the system properties of this machine. And that's just what the point of this application is doing. It's simple endpoint, just so you can test out as a proof of concept here. All right, so now we want to go back to the terminal that's running our Liberty instance here, and I just hit Control-C to shut down the server. Alternatively, you could run the Liberty stop command here, and that will stop your session as well. Okay, so now we can actually start going through the guide now that we know what our final project will look like. And the first step will be to create a RESTful application. So I'm going to cd back to my start directory here. And this time I'm going to run the liberty dev command. So as Harry was just talking about, liberty dev is liberty dev mode or development mode. And this is our hot deploy tool. So the idea here is that you start up Liberty in development mode, and then all of your changes will be picked up for you and reflected at your application server. So you don't have to worry about recompiling, rebuilding, repackaging, redeploying. Dev mode will handle that all for you. So as you code, your changes are reflected right away for you. So we'll just wait until we see that Liberty is running dev mode and that our server has started successfully here. And I'm not watching the chat, but I'm going to take that as no questions. But again, anyone feel free to come off mute if you have questions about any of this. So we can see here in our messaging, Liberty is running in dev mode. We have some basic commands about dev mode, about how to run tests on demand, restart the server, how to start the server and quit dev mode. And then we also have our port information here. So by default, Liberty binds to port 9080. And then by default, dev mode also exposes a debugging port 7777. So you can actually attach to that port at any time using whichever IDE you prefer to use. And then you could step through your code as you would with any debugger. And that does also relate to the port binding factor, which I think is number 11 or 12. Just to tie it back to those 12, 15 factors there. All right, so next we want to actually add some source code here. So I'm just gonna minimize that terminal that dev mode's running in, but it's still there, and I'm just gonna leave it running as I make these code changes. So the first thing we want to do is replace the system application class here. So I just click this button to open that class, but that is in my start directory under source main Java there. And we can see there's not really any code here yet, so we want to replace it with some code. And to do that, I just hit the copy button here and replaced it in the browser. And then just to show you what happened there, as I added the code, dev mode picked up that I made a code change, recompiled my code for me. So again, if you like to work without an IDE, dev mode works command line, so you can get that instant feedback. All right, so I've just added this add application path annotation from the Jakarta JAX-RS feature here. And this is exposing a common resource path here. So if you recall, we hit that endpoint system properties. So this is the system piece of that. And each step also has quite a bit of a write-up. So it does quite a good job of explaining what all of these APIs we're using are. So I definitely recommend taking the time to read these as you go through the different guides. So next is creating the RESTful resource. So we're going to go ahead and create a new class here. So if I pull my terminals back up, it's the first thing we want to do is create this new file. So I'm just going to run this touch command here. Oh, let's see, did that work? Wrong terminal. Let me copy and paste that over. Okay, so that touch command, what I did is just create a new class there, and we can open up that properties resource.java file here. And then we want to replace it with the code that they give us here. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste. And we can see that this code is populating that properties endpoint. And what it's doing is just returning our system properties in the form of JSON, or not here. So if I pull my terminal back up, again, I still have that dev mode terminal running, and we can see source compilation was successful here. So the final step now is to actually configure our server. And for this, we need to configure our Liberty server configuration file. So in Liberty, we call this the server.xml file. It lives in the source main Liberty config directory here. And this is where we specify the different features that our application will be using, as well as you could configure other things about your server, like the location of your web app or anything like that. So I'm just going to replace the content with what we have here on the left. And just to point out a few things, we are enabling the RESTful web services feature. So this is the JAX-RS feature that exposes our endpoint, and then we're also using the JSON view feature here. And dev mode does pick up changes to your server configuration as well. So we can see in our terminal running dev mode, our server configuration was updated, and we can see our web application was updated as well there. So that should be all we really need to get to that final application that we took a look at the beginning. So if I did all these steps right, let's check that curl command again. And there it is. So it looks exactly how it did when we saw the finished directory of the project there. And we can see that we've exposed the system properties at that system properties endpoint. The final step of the guide and many of our guides is actually testing the service or writing integration tests for the code we've added here. So the first thing we want to do is create a new endpoint IT class here. So again, just running a touch command and then opening that up. So this class now, we're in source test Java IT, and then the package name here. And let's go ahead and populate that with the code on the left. So just a quick overview of what this test case is doing. So we're using JUnit here, so using the @test annotation, and this is testing that get properties endpoint. So going to that local host system properties endpoint, checking that the response code is correct, and then also checking that the OS name matches the one on the sysprops here. And dev mode will watch for changes in your tests as well. So here, as I've made changes to that test class, we can see our test compilation was successful. And just to show you what it looks like, for instance, if it was not successful, say I forgot something there, you do get that feedback directly from dev mode. So we can see now I have errors in my test compilation code, and I can fix that. So hopefully that helps, developer productivity to get that instant feedback without having to compile, build, package, all of that, and then deploy again. In terms of running the test, so when we're running with dev mode, I can just hit enter in the terminal running dev mode, and that will run my test for me. So here I hit enter, and I can see that new test that we just added ran, and it passed, which is great. We could try failing it if we wanted, just for proof of concept. So here I've altered it, and then I hit enter here, and we can see that failed. So you do get that instant feedback. And that's the end of this guide. So all of our guides follow this format. Of course, we didn't read all of the details, but I recommend that you guys do. And the last step of every guide is to clean up your environment. So in the terminal that's running dev mode, you could hit Q and send that to the terminal. You could Control C, and what that will do is stop dev mode as well as stop the Liberty server that's running. And then finally, you just want to clean up the environment in the skills network lab here. So you just remove that guide from the environment. I'll pause here to see if there are any questions about any of these steps or the guide itself or the environment. Okay, sounds like no questions around this. So what
I
I'll
see a
do.
question in chat. Does
Sure.
Open Liberty have support for Kotlin?
For Kotlin. Harry or Rich, do you want to talk to that?
I do not know.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Kotlin.
Yeah.
Other language, yeah.
Liberty's just is a Java only server. So.
Yes.
Mhm.
I know.
Okay, what does a startup CPU cost? The question comes from serverless issues.
Startup CPU costs.
So we have very fast startup times. I want to say that it's like millisecond type startup times, and we've got some stuff in the works to use CRIU in the future to take snapshots and make it even faster. It is not as fast as Quark is starting up, but it's very close.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, and as Harry was saying earlier in the presentation too, with the way you can configure the server through the server XML file in Liberty, you can choose only the features that you're needing. So for example, in this guide, we only really needed these 2 features. So by being able to specify these things, it makes the startup, quite a bit faster than having to install all these features for every application, if it doesn't need it. Okay, so I will post the suggested labs in the chat here, and we will open it up so everyone can get a chance to try things hands-on. I see in the chat, can the REST API, you develop the access from outside the environment? So currently, no, this is all running locally on this machine on the IBM cloud, just for the purposes of trying things out and trying out technology. So it's a local session. And so it was, shut down as soon as I stopped my Liberty server instance there. Okay, so I think I will leave this slide up.
Yeah, I think so. So Bruce, what's your feel on this? Does everyone want to try these out, or?
Well, I actually had some questions. I was kind of hinting on that one about can the REST API be accessed from outside the environment? I just had some questions about this environment that we're in. As far as what its capabilities are. You're saying that as soon as I log out, everything just shuts down and it all goes away? Or is this an environment that maybe it's a separate product and you can actually persist all this? And so you might have a development team that's all working in this web-based version of what looks like Visual Studio Code, and they can just develop and deploy all their applications there by working through their web browser and not have to install anything on their local computer. Tell me what you can do with this.
Sure. So the IBM Skills Network Lab environment we're using here, this is purely for training purposes. So it will not persist after you log out. I think there's even a cleanup time on the machines. So, even if I left this open and came back maybe 12 hours later, I wouldn't be able to access the same session. It would be gone. There are instructions to log out of every session, but it's not made for development purposes. It's more for just training purposes so that you can go explore all the different guides we have and get hands-on with the technologies before actually committing to, setting things up locally. Another nice thing is that we have many guides around like deploying to Kubernetes, deploying to OpenShift, cloud deployment. And so these environments are all set up with the prerequisites you need, right? Setting some of these things up locally could take quite a bit of time or potentially, cost depending on the cloud you choose to use. So the nice thing is you can come in, try things out, get a feel for them before you maybe choose to use them in a local development environment.
And also, not all of the guides are available on the cloud to run in the cloud. Is that correct, Catherine?
Right, that's correct. So we are currently working on getting a lot of these on the cloud. So any that say run in cloud will be able to have the Skills Network Lab environment here. But if you do prefer to work locally, the prerequisites for all of them are quite minimal. So you could do that as well. But yeah, we can see all of these are all capable of running in that environment.
Okay, but I gather IBM does have an IBM cloud environment, and I think you even own Red Hat, or at least that's the rumor. And I'm thinking that maybe after you've worked through a lot of these lessons, you would be well positioned to be able to take advantage of a similar type of environment in the IBM cloud that it actually persists and you can save everything, right?
Yeah, so we definitely have the IBM cloud, and actually the Skills Network Lab environment here is hosted on IBM cloud. So it's powered by IBM cloud, underneath.
Okay. And is that really Visual Studio Code I'm seeing there, or how did you do that magic? Because it's I thought it was a desktop-based application, but it's running in like Electron or some such thing, and maybe they figured out how to get it to run in a browser or something. They must have done some magic there.
Right, so it is Visual Studio Code, or at least a play on. It's not, I don't believe it has all of the full capabilities of the desktop app, but that's what it was based on here, just an in-browser version.
Okay, I just think that's remarkable that you're able to do as much as you can.
Yeah, it's great for coming in to try things out, much easier.
And I suppose
especially
I could even run like VI inside that terminal.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, you don't necessarily have to, necessarily use the editor if you don't want to. You could work entirely on terminal.
All right. I don't know if I can sudo, but I may not be in the group. Okay. Does anyone else have some questions? Oh, I see another one. This is a different profile for JEE server. Only configure on your server for less using server XML, less or all JEE servers. I think that's the question Peter was asking.
Sorry, could you repeat the question only?
It's in the chat window there.
Oh,
Peter
I
Treese
see.
asked it.
No, it was a good server. It's a good server, less than using all the jars, less jars. That was there was questions on what's the advantages using Liberty?
I see. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, that's one thing. Again, it's lightweight, it's fast, are two of the things that really make it popular. It's also, we have a zero migration policy, so that when we add new things, we don't take old things away. We deprecate them, but your code, if you upgrade versions, you won't have to, Was that a question? Oh,
No, background noise.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying zero migration. So we're very strict about that. So we try not to break people's code so that you can just keep, every month you can get our next release and slap it with your code and away you go with no changes. And we do have monthly releases. So we usually fix things pretty quick when we find bugs and things of that nature.
Hi, this is Abhisar. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you. I have some
Hi.
background noise though. Did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I'm really sorry that I got a little bit diverted because of the great demo, and when I saw that ID and how much of ease we were actually doing things. But I'm just trying to tie up things together from the perspective that we saw the demo, that how easily we can create the services or the lab, how it's purely containerized web-based labs where it's so easy to actually test what you want to test. And the other thing what we saw was the Open Liberty server, that how light it is and how modularized it is, that you can add the features what you want only. But we started with the 12-factor apps definitions. So I'm just trying to tie things together, that saying that Open Liberty actually is, because it's feature specific JE profile, it makes it easy to create 15-factor or 12-factor apps for cloud, or in what way Open Liberty actually is helping that 12-factor. That's what I'm trying to understand, if I'm not missing something in between.
I think a lot of it has to do with using MicroProfile and Jakarta EE that come with the telemetry APIs. And so those
Okay.
15 factors are handled by a number of different sources, right? From your cloud infrastructure itself to the actual frameworks you're using. So this is sort of like the reason we talk about the 15 factors is that's where MicroProfile comes in and shines. To help
Got
solve.
it. Got it.
Right, and even you could go to the guides here, and we've suggested a number of MicroProfile guides in the chat as well, but you can filter on MicroProfile, and we could even talk to some of these. So when we look at creating RESTful web services like we just did, that's very much, you know, API first. That's, I think, the second factor. And then when we get into things like authentication and authorization, that's where something like JWT would come in handy. When we talk about MicroProfile health and metrics, that's the telemetry piece. So that really ties into those APIs, as Rich was saying.
So I had a question about IBM Open Liberty. Is it intended to be the successor to IBM WebSphere? How do the two really compare?
So a lot of it is the same code base. Liberty and Open Liberty, you know, were made for the cloud. So like I said, the startup time is much, much faster. So we do have Open Liberty as an open source product, and we also have WebSphere Liberty, which is a licensed product as well.
Okay, and there's certain features that would maybe make it easier to migrate an application that was in IBM WebSphere to this WebSphere Open Liberty. What's the distinction between the two, other than obviously one's pay for and the other's open? But I mean,
Yeah, I think there's a use case too, right? So WebSphere was meant for the old school monolith Java applications, and with the advent of the cloud and containerizing everything, that's where Open Liberty plays a role. So there would be two places you'd go depending on what your application is going to do or how you're going to design it.
okay, so you would architect your applications just differently rather than trying to run like,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's the traditional, like, I don't know, I'm not an expert in IBM WebSphere, but I think of it as a very heavyweight thing. You deploy your Java applications into it. It runs multiple applications in that container. And it's the idea is that WebSphere is intended to be the container for the applications. Whereas if you're doing something like Open Liberty, what you're doing is you're creating like a Docker container.
So
you have smaller things in that. Looks like Peter Treese may have a better answer for me. Peter, you want to chime in?
Yes. If you start with Liberty, you could run it
Okay.
on a full server of the Pro using WebSpheres. So if you start with Liberty, it starts creating an ear, okay? You could
Okay.
use it on a full server. And therefore, if you use it as a containerization, you could deliver it inside of containerization. It starts better. And therefore, you could do it that way. Liberty is good.
Okay.
yeah, so Bruce, going back to your question, so traditional WebSphere, or TWAS as we call it, you know, is the big monolith, you know, huge applications. You load everything, you pull in the whole SDK, all of your jars. And so those applications tend to start up fairly slowly, just because the way people developed them. And so you can take that, your TWAS app, and shove it into a container and run TWAS in a container. Whereas Liberty and Open Liberty were designed to be fast and start up, you know, in a container, you know, instantaneously almost. Whereas if you put your, you know, monolith app in a container, it's going to take a minute to start up.
Right. And so the WebSphere has been around a long time, and there are applications, they start up slow, but they never come down, right? So they run and you forget about them. So when you go, if you want to go to Open Liberty, you could take that same application, you could slice it up and you could start pulling it apart and pulling out services. And that's the path that I think we have tools to help users go down that path when they wanted to get into the container world. But I don't think you take a traditional monolith app and just stick it in Open Liberty and call it a day. That's not the purpose.
I see. So there must be some sort of a migration path where you slice up your application and maybe you have documentation on what it is developers need to do if they want to split up their monolith into a whole bunch of these micro.
Talk about a monolith. A monolith using JA users, you could do it. You could change it inside of using, you could do it that way. You understand using, creating ear. You have to look at all this code. You have to understand using it inside of a web server systems. You could use Liberty, it's good, but you don't use all this stuff inside of log using web server systems. Therefore, you don't use all the code. You don't use all the code, but you have to create your own ear. You understand using that way. You understand the systems. You have to understand most of the people using databases, most of the time they don't use it. Most of the time you create an ear, you talk to a database, or you create a Terraform using AWS systems. Therefore, you could create a containerization. The same things about using AWS systems. Also, you can create a containerization. You could create a large containerization using web server systems, but it's better using Liberty.
Yeah, I understand, but there's like large enterprises that are stuck in WebSphere.
So
I'm thinking
Bruce,
of someone who has to deal with that every day.
so Bruce, I just put a link in there. So we do have a product offering called Mono to Micro.
Okay.
And it's basically doing what you're talking about. It'll take your application and analyze it and tell you kind of what you need to do to break that monolith into microservices. I do not work on that product, but it is available, and I can't answer a whole lot of questions about it. But there's your link to check it out.
Okay, great. I just bookmarked it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think both the scenarios, whether it's WebSphere or Open Liberty, it's basically like Open Liberty is more like your drilling tool. You have all, so you have the driller, but at a given point in time, since in microservice, conceptually, you are supposed to do one specific task at a time. That's that microservice is for a specific purpose. So you pull out that extension and plug it in and then use it. Though it's capable of working with any extension. But WebSphere is like your when you go to a dental examination and you sit on the table and the doctor has all the tools in front of you, but still he is using at a time. So now in real life, both have their own use cases. WebSphere may have tomorrow, because we have seen in the mobiles that, you know, when mobile phones start going smaller, they went to a point where it became too tiny. So we may realize in a couple of years that maybe we are going too micro, and that's where WebSphere will play a role when we will find the right balance.
Yeah. I think the whole trend going from mono to micro is all about upgrading sustainability. Like, the more pieces you have, the independent of each other, you can upgrade. That you don't have to wait for the whole thing to keep moving forward. So you tend to have release cycles a lot shorter in a microservice environment.
Right.
I see. And when they're smaller units, I would imagine that they're easier to test.
Yeah.
In isolation, I would think.
And plus, if that particular service is getting hammered a lot in the cloud, you can actually scale up and have multiple versions of that, right?
Right, spin up multiple instances.
I think the bigger advantage from instead of testing was the manageability. Like, you know, it's easier for a team to manage one specific use case, because now they can think about one use case and it's all peripherals rather than thinking about too many use cases. So that's where it became very successful as a model.
It would be cool in another presentation. I thought this presentation demo was really great. I think going from the mono, a lot of us are going from the monolith to micro, and I think that there's a lot of tools like maybe API gateways or service mesh that we don't really like. Maybe most of us don't know how to use these things, or how do you in your big enterprise, like Abriash, I'm sorry if I say your name right now. Abhisar, basically, taking a developer team and cutting them off to other areas of your business as your enterprise is changing. It'd be really cool to see how you're using these tools, because it seems like Liberty is very helpful to cut those monoliths into small pieces.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. I know that we do have presentations on that subject.
Yeah, I
And
think
I
a lot
think-
of people would be interested in that process of how do you go about re-architecting a monolithic application into multiple microservices, and what type of communications now are you going to have between all of these services, because you've got to do things like service discovery now, and you've got to monitor which ones are up and which ones are down, and then you got to do end-to-end testing, right? So somebody with their browser is going to go to your fancy application and they're going to do something, and then it's going to set off this domino a chain of this service talked to that service, which talked to that service, which talked to this database, which went back to this service discovery, and then this got logged back, and then it all the way went back, and finally you get something back into the browser, right? Well, how do you trace all of that? I think would be something people would be interested in as well.
Okay.
You make it sound like it's a joke, but I see this all the time. So
yeah, there's because I think there's a couple of schools of thought. I mean, I think I've seen some schools say you should actually start off a greenfield application as a monolith, and only when your system needs more scalability do you think about chopping it up into all of these different microservices, because that can add complexity to your application potentially that you might not need. I don't know. Peter's probably seen cases like this, or may have some thoughts on that.
Yes, Liberty helps you, honestly. If you pull
Okay.
out your ear and run it on Liberty, see if you're using JA using that way. You have to
Mhm.
look at your systems. Therefore, you're talking to a database, or you're talking to a queue, or talking to other systems. RESTful systems on the systems, therefore you create it. It's easy to understand using that URI that he delivered inside of the text. Use it first. Look at your code. Look at your code and use it. IBM is helping you, honestly.
Okay. Oh, I'm not saying they're not.
I'll just add to that the app modernization team does host, I think, bi-monthly online sessions that are free to enroll, and they talk a lot about app modernization tools, and they show products like the mono to micro product. So that's always being tweeted about. So if you connect with us on Twitter, we can always provide links there as well.
We could send that information to you, Bruce.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd
definitely.
be great. So I gather is there more to the presentation, or are we just in the Q&A?
I think we wanted time for you guys, if you wanted, to go through one of these guides and try it out yourself to see if you had any questions, usability questions, or what the lab was all about, and we'd stick around and answer those questions. That was the
Okay.
thought. But if no one wants to do them and wants to come back to them later, you know, everyone has links to these, and you can always do these on your own.
Okay.
They're always available. And we also have one more lab that, if you have the time, is pretty interesting. It takes about 120 minutes, but it's a technical deep dive. So it goes end to end. It actually builds on that same application I showed earlier, and it takes you through many of the different MicroProfile APIs, as well as deploying to Kubernetes, you know, building a Docker container. So that's a new guide that the team just put out. And so if you have the time, it's really quite interesting. And I'll post that link in the chat too.
Okay, well, I'm not hearing any other questions or anything, but I gather if we want to work on these labs here on our own time, is there a community forum somewhere where people can ask questions that's monitored by IBM folks?
Yes. So, well, first of all, you can always reach out to any of us on Twitter or by email. But if you have questions about a specific lab, you can just go. So for example, here, so I'm on the intro guide here. At the very bottom, there's always a section around asking questions. So you scroll here. Okay, so you can always ask questions. We monitor Stack Overflow, anything tagged there. You can also just open issues against each guide themselves. So they're all hosted on GitHub. You can create an issue just to ask a question, and the team also monitors those as well.
Okay, great. Well, that's all my questions, but I don't want to monopolize everything if other people have questions here. Ted, you've been kind of quiet. You use a certain IBM product. I thought maybe you might have some questions about it.
Yeah, I think it was pretty much covered by the other people. I will say that the product we're using a web sphere application, but we also have and we're developing a rich, well, web 2.0, whatever the rich web, whatever the current terminology is. We also have a older application that uses the same database. So I think it's more important for us to get the old application, get all the functionality duplicated in the web application before we turn off so we can turn off the old application and we can do things in a more organized way. So I don't think it's the right time for it.
Okay, well, if that's all the questions, thank you. Normally at this time, we'd have a big round of applause here for our, oh, I see Alan's cheering, and I'll add my applause to all of this. So thanks for a great presentation here and coming and giving us that. Yeah, we're getting lots of waves and thumbs up here all over the screen. So that's great. So at this point, I think we're ready to move to the raffle. So I'm going to stop the recording here, if it will let me.